Welcome back. It's a new edition of the Penn State recruiting podcast from Blue White Illustrated. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. We are going to cover a good bit today. A couple Penn State commits in the class of 2022 have taken visits elsewhere. What's the latest with them? Ryan's going to give us the details on that. We will recap a Penn State Michigan visitors list that maybe wasn't as big as we thought it would be, but still ended up being pretty good in terms of who was on campus. And finally, we'll look ahead to Penn State's last opportunity to host prospects at Beaver Stadium this year. That's coming up for the Rutgers game on Saturday. Ryan, let's get going, buddy. How you doing? What's the good word here as November rolls along?
Yeah, we've got one more home game to go. We'll get into a couple names that are popping up for that at the end. 4 losses in 5 weeks. That's not great. I don't know. It seems as though the James Franklin rumors are slowing down a little bit. I know Football Scoop reported yesterday that he's not considered a top candidate for USC, which didn't seem to be the case. 3, 4, 5 weeks ago. I don't know if anyone ever said he's truly the top candidate,
Right.
And maybe you can. I don't think that was ever. He was their number one, but he was considered one of them. So I thought that was notable. It seems like there's a lot of. Go ahead.
I was just going to say this is not recruiting, but we'll get into that here in a sec. But I'll just make one point is that, James Franklin's kind of become like Matt Campbell in a way where every year now his name gets linked to a job, even if it's not, no one, it's kind of just become like the obvious name to throw out there. Like, okay, we have to do a podcast with coaching candidates now that our coach is gone, or we're going to make a hot board of names to know now that our coach is gone. James Franklin's going to make that list every single year, regardless of what's being said behind the scenes. So, certainly was he the top candidate? I don't know, but he certainly was a candidate. And so, when you lose like they have, that it's kind of a byproduct of it. But to me, Ryan, I think if somebody was going to hire James Franklin, they'd probably do it on the aggregate of his time as a head coach, not necessarily one season, but the last 2 years have not been great. So you're right, though; those have died off pretty substantially here over the last few weeks.
There's lots of talk that he's been maybe in contract negotiations with Penn State too. I don't know. I'm the recruiting guy. I'm not going to pretend that I have connections with Old Main up there, but there's a lot of talk that maybe he's getting a contract here soon, and they're trying to figure out.
Well, keep in mind too that he has one that runs through 2026 or something like that. So he's got a lot of extensions to contracts that are extended already. But I guess that's just the way it works. I mean, Jimbo Fisher, kind of the perfect example.
Who's his new agent? What's the name again?
I can't remember. Jimmy Sexton.
Yeah, I don't think you hire him if you're not getting a new contract, though.
Well, he's not going to take you on in all likelihood if you're not getting a new contract.
Exactly.
Because that's what I meant
to say.
That's sort of what his game is, right? Swoop in, get a contract, get his cut, and move on. Hey, man, it's a good line of work if you can get it. You know what you're doing. So,
that's just Power 5. That's just Power 5 football today, too. You know what I mean? Like whether fans think you earned it or not. I mean, there's a lot of other schools that haven't done what James Franklin has done over the last 8 years. A lot of other coaches, who are also getting pay raises for similar seasons to what we're seeing now. And just we can go into this all day, but it sounds more. A lot of people seem way more optimistic right now that James Franklin is going to be the head coach in 2022. So we will see.
Yes, we will. That's the coaching segment of the latest Blue White Illustrated Penn State recruiting podcast. Now we'll get into the actual recruiting news. Ryan, let's start with Kayton Allen, I guess, the IMG Academy running back. Longtime Penn State commit, a 4-star, very, very good player down in Florida. Part of a 1-2 punch of running backs in this class. Nick Singleton, of course, being the other, the Governor Mifflin standout. Allen visited Florida State recently, which I think was interesting to me because it's not like Florida State's having some kind of wonderful year at this point, So, and they have their own kind of issues down there. So, what do you know about that visit? Where do things stand? And I guess on the barometer of, Penn State, Jordan Allen, from nothing to worry about to Jordan Allen, who obviously is parted ways with Penn State. Where do things stand there?
Definitely not towards the Jordan Allen end. I'd say. I'll stick to a 1 through 10 ratio, if you want to call it. It's a little easier. I mean, I would put it at like a 4, maybe. I mean, I'll say this. So, Florida State people, they don't seem to think he's going to flip. And then I just talked to some Penn State people this morning. We're taping this at basically 11 a.m. Tuesday, and everybody seems to be feeling pretty good from Penn State's end that this was a visit. He took it. He went with friends. I think his mom and his aunt with him. But was he ever seriously considering a flip? At least not a flip in the immediate future. Again, I think this is similar to Zane. We'll talk about him in a second. But to me, it feels like this was a precautionary thing. You know, a lot of talk about James Franklin maybe moving on, and he wants to see what's going on there. But I think Penn State fans should feel okay right now. Well, there's 4 weeks to go, but Penn State contacts seem to think that they've weathered that storm, or even if there was a storm, I'm not even sure.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that guys are maybe putting, I think you just touched on it, but I want to expand on it a bit. Is it fair to say that guys are kind of putting, I don't want to call it safety nets in play, but keeping their options open just in case something does happen with James Franklin? Do you think that has more to do with these visits than anything else, or what do you think is going on there?
I would assume that's the case. Now, like Kaytron's not going to talk, right? Like we're not going to get Kaytron on the phone. I don't think anybody from 247 or Rivals has gotten him. He's just not one to talk. And Florida State, they're incredibly aggressive. Their media, like, well, they'll go hang out at the airport and try and interview guys. They'll hang out outside the football complex trying to interview guys, and they weren't able to get him leaving campus. Someone actually said that he was I think leaving, and mom grabbed him or something like before they could interview him, and there was nothing. One of my buddies told me that from down there. So we'll see what happens there. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't expect him to talk all that much. And Penn State seems to be pretty confident that they're all right here. So for right now, I don't think there's a whole lot for fans to worry about.
All right, so that's the latest on Kayton Allen. Again, the 4-star did visit Florida State, but doesn't seem to be too much to worry about there at this point in time. We'll see how things shake out over the next couple of weeks, Ryan. Another Florida guy, who took some visitors, getting interest from other schools is the defensive lineman, Zane Durant. You spoke with his coach recently, and obviously I think that much like Allen, to call it a storm, I think is probably inaccurate, but there's some moving pieces there, no question.
Yeah, and Zane, I would put Kaytron a little bit more of a worry more than Zane, and both of them are low though. Like if I'm doing 1 through 10, I had Kaytron at a 4. I'd put Zane at like a 2. I really don't see him moving on as long as James Franklin's in charge. I talked to his coach last week. His coach pretty much just said, "Hey, look, this is just precautionary. If the coach were to move on, he needs to keep his options open." And it's not like Zane didn't have Miami very high on his list to begin with, So yes, to go back, they're going to keep recruiting him, and I'm sure Miami will continue to do that over the next couple of weeks. But he's had his look at Miami multiple times now. He went down for a game. I don't ever want to diminish game visits, but it's not like it's an official visit that Kaytron took and he spent 48 hours with the coaches. I mean, it's just went to the game, went home. I'm sure he talked to Manny Diaz and staff for a little bit there, but doesn't seem to be much concern. And everybody in Lash seems to be pretty confident that these two are going to stick with them and sign as long as everybody in Lash is still in Lash come December 15th, which I expect them to be. So, that's why I want to start with the Franklin talk, because I feel like, yeah, it's not recruiting, but it is recruiting right now, right, when you're 4 weeks out, and that seems to be what everybody's wondering about. And one thing I'll add, just with the whole class in general, like 3-4 weeks ago, and I think we talked about this a little bit on the podcast, there was definitely some angst, I think, among the commits and their families. I had a lot of people reaching out to me asking if I had answers, and I don't really have much more than what they have, but over the last 10 days or so, that really seems to have died down. There seems way more optimism, amongst the players. I know they're doing Zooms as a class with Franklin and his staff. I don't know if it's every week; it's maybe every other week. But just the overall feel, I guess, from the guys I speak with on somewhat regular basis, they don't seem nearly as concerned now. So as long as Franklin's here, man, this class is going to hold firm.
Let's pull one string you mentioned quick before we move on to looking at the Michigan visitors, and that's if everyone that's in Lash is there on December 15th. There are currently, I believe as we record this, 12 college football jobs open, and there might be a 13th by the time we get done. The most recent one was Justin Fuente going at Virginia Tech. But, athletic directors and boosters and universities, they aren't waiting around anymore to make these decisions. They're pulling the cord earlier than ever. And so my question would just be, and there's no answer for it. I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but I think the tone has changed in the sense that if a month ago you felt like James Franklin was leaving or you were leaning that way, I think it's now flipped to most people are leaning toward him staying. And so the question then becomes about what about the rest of the staff? Are any changes going to be made either on Penn State's side of it in terms of making an adjustment to the current staff, or any of these guys going to get interest for any of these open jobs and more of them are going to come open? Or could one of your position coaches have a buddy or somebody who gets a head coaching job and they get pulled away to go from a position coach to a coordinator? There's going to be, I guess what I'm saying here, and I'm not implying anything or suggesting anything's coming around the corner, but it's going to be probably a record-setting offseason for head coaching hires, which means it'll be a record-setting season for assistant coaching hires. And, Penn State staff is full of guys who, Brent Pry, Terry Smith have been here a really long time. Do they have head coaching aspirations? Does Terry Smith want to be a defensive coordinator? Does John Scott Jr. want to be a defensive coordinator? Does Jalen Snyder see himself as an offensive coordinator? And does he think he's ready for that opportunity? All these questions are going to have to be answered. And, it all starts at the top, but there's obviously a lot of other things that will be in play potentially as we move into the offseason.
From what just history, right? Just looking over the years, I think you got to expect one change, right?
Right.
It's just, I feel like there's always like one every year.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like decommitments. Exactly. It's just the history says that it is likely. But I will also add that I think financially, Penn State, like a lot of people throughout all this talk we're talking about, is the financial backing there for assistants. And I think that's been there since Franklin's last contract. I think that was a major point when he signed that contract a couple of years ago, that money is there for your assistants. I think it's, it should be, top 10 or so nationally. Like that's part of the contract, that Penn State has to be among the best or so when it comes to consistently paying assistants. And I believe they get raises like basically every year. So I don't think like financially it'll be an impact. But like you said, it's just all about whether guys can move up the ladder, whether guys do want to move up the ladder, and then also just from performance perspectives. I think fans know there's been a couple positions that have underwhelmed this year. Does Franklin look to move on? Do other guys look to, like I said, move up the ladder at whatever it is? Personally, I don't see Terry or Brent moving on. I feel like they've. No,
I don't either, but I think that, when you're having that conversation, I think we can feel pretty good about the fact that, Ty Howe is not going to be getting a promotion elsewhere. Taylor Stubblefield probably the same way. So I think you can, those filter out lines. So, but, when you talk about guys who could move up the coaching ladder, I think those two,
they make
maybe not 100% guys that we think would move on. I agree with you. I don't really see it. But you could also, it's not crazy, I guess, to look at it and say, you know what, Brent's been one of James Franklin's most loyal assistants for a really long time now. Does he want to be a head coach? And obviously that opportunity is not coming here if James Franklin's here. And then with Terry Smith, seems to me he likes his role and he doesn't need to be a play caller. And so, I don't think Penn State fans have anything to worry about there. But again, when you're looking at who could realistically move up, there's only a couple in my mind.
Yep. Yeah. Like I said, I'd be surprised if one thing doesn't happen. It just seems to happen every year, one change on the staff. But keeping the staff together and making sure nothing, just making sure it continues as a whole. That's been an issue in recent years, and you would think that they would want to, have some consistency there. So we'll see what happens, but I'd be surprised if there's a lot of major switches, especially not before December 15th, and how it relates to recruiting. So.
Continuity is key, and of course, other schools are going to be on the flip side of that. They're going to want to make these moves by December 10th, so they have time to try and get some recruits in from elsewhere. It's a fascinating thing to follow, and again, I don't really know if it's going to impact Penn State, but it could in the inverse. If you would have a couple of decommitments potentially, like I said, you feel pretty good about Kayton Allen and Zane Durant, so I don't think we're going down that road. And it's possible that even if guys did decommit from Penn State, they could just save the scholarships for the transfer portal anyway. But there's also going to be, again, with so much movement, there's going to be guys at other schools that maybe their coordinator's no longer there, and the new place he's going doesn't consider the kid to take. Maybe a head coach gets fired. So a lot to figure out here. Penn State's class is full. That's good, but there'll be so much movement nationally that, we'll see how things shake out. And obviously, at this point, to me, when I look at where, and this conversation's gone off the rails, but that's okay. When I look at where Penn State is going into next season, like we've talked before about them needing to save space for the transfer portal. They need to save more space for the transfer portal, as far as I'm concerned.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. To me, like, for example, we were talking about Julian Armella a couple weeks ago, offensive tackle. I just checked in. As of Tuesday morning, they are not planning to host him for an official visit. And to me, yes, they want to add help on the offensive line. And this is just me spitballing, but I just continue to kind of get the vibe that transfer portal additions are becoming much more important than 2022 additions. And look, there's only a handful of guys in 2022 that they would have serious interest in adding anyway. Jayshon Barham still seems to be very high on that list, but 2 weeks ago, that was a big push to, hey, maybe we can get a chance to get Armello on campus here. And maybe the player has just figured it out himself and is like, I'm not all that interested. That's not the vibe I get, though. Like, the vibe I get from his camp is that they are interested. But the vibe I get from Penn State is that, I think maybe adding guys who can help more immediately, especially with 2022. I mean, when you look at some things for next year, man, they're going to be missing some star players, and then there's some underclassmen who haven't really filled in the gaps or taken that next step this year. So there's definitely seems to be a little bit of concern on what 2022 could be, and they need some more Arnold Ebiketis to make a major impact.
At least a couple. So Penn State will have to be aggressive in the transfer portal at any number of positions, and that'll keep you and I plenty busy during the offseason. This is the Penn State Recruiting Podcast from Blue White Illustrated. That's covered a lot of coaching news so far, a couple of tidbits on commits. And, you said it, Ryan. Coaching changes are recruiting. Recruiting's everything in college football. So let's move on to the Michigan visitor list. You and I had the chance to get down close to the field and see a lot of these guys in person before Penn State, Michigan. And as we talked about on last week's show, which you can find anywhere you get your audio, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, so on and so forth, also at youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated. The noon kick was going to make it tough for some guys to get there. Some guys got there seconds before kickoff, and that's not uncommon for a noon game. So what did this list end up being? What was the reality versus the expectation?
So when we were standing down there taking photos, we thought that there was a good chunk of guys who didn't show, especially from outside the region, just because we didn't see him on the sidelines. And then come to learn Sunday morning that, the camp from American Heritage, for example, Mark Fletcher, Damon Fagan, and then Damari Brown. Fagan and Brown are cornerbacks, and Fletcher's a running back. They did show, and I believe, I'm not sure if they got here right before the game. I think they actually got here a little bit after the game, because the way they explained it to me is they flew to Philadelphia and got to Philadelphia at like 9:30. So if you just, anyone who drives from Philly to Penn State knows that's like a 3-hour trip.
That's a bold move. Here. Yeah,
it is.
The fact that they made it for kickoff is miraculous.
I don't think they did. I think they were here a little after. But the big thing about that camp was that they actually stayed overnight, and then they were here Sunday, and that was what made that trip worth it. Then, I had a good interview with Damon Fagan. Fans can read on the site on just kind of his overall thoughts. Yeah. He was very happy with what he was happy to make this trip, and that was actually, it's a struggle sometimes to make these trips, and when you have it, and you guys have coming down south, you have guys coming from down south coming up into their cold. That's actually some of the few times where you do get guys that are like, it was okay. But he seemed to really enjoy Penn State staff, spoke incredibly highly of Jaywan Snyder and Terry Smith and Franklin. And he actually told me he's planning to take an official visit here, and that Penn State's the only school he's discussed an official visit with so far. So I thought that was interesting. Mark Fletcher, the running back from that group, he checked in at like 6'2", 225, and we had him at on 3 at like 6'1", 185. So obviously those numbers, I think, were back in the spring, but like that guy is a tank. I'd be very curious to see, or learn more about his progression, and maybe see him at a camp this summer. I know Penn State loves him, and actually, what's interesting about that is, from talking to some people, like speed is a major point of emphasis, it seems to be, for the running back group. But he doesn't fit that at all. He's just a total downhill runner. And I think that's just, they see something unique there. And then also He's really built a strong relationship with Snyder, maybe one of the strongest among all the 2023 running backs. And but to get him up on campus, and his dad is actually who brought that American Heritage group, was a really good sign. Obviously a long way to go. American Heritage is a stacked school. They're going to have all these types of offers. But to get them to make that kind of a trip, to stay Saturday night with crazy hotel prices as it is, hang out Sunday, I mean, it is a serious sign for all three of them and their interest in Penn State. So I thought that was interesting. There's a bunch of names that I think Penn State fans should be familiar with by now. Rodney Gallagher was here. Joshua Miller was here. Tony Rojas was actually a late ad that we didn't have originally on the list. And I think all three of those guys, Rojas, Gallagher, and Miller, are leaning Penn State's direction. I'm going to hopefully catch up here with Miller soon. I didn't want to bug him. We talk. I feel like I bug these guys all the time, especially with them. With Miller we thought was about to make a commitment in early November. So I didn't bug Josh right after the visit, but we are supposed to catch up here soon. I'll have more on him a little bit. Hey, one other guy that popped up on campus that was interesting is Trayon Webb. He's a 2023 running back commit for Oklahoma. He's actually teammates with Cam Miller. There were another group, Cam Miller. We didn't see him on the sideline, but that's because I think they got here like right at kickoff. I mean, when you're flying out from Jacksonville for a noon kick, I mean, it's got to be a crazy morning there. But he and Webb did make it up here. I thought it's interesting. Like I said, Webb's a Oklahoma commit. He probably more than likely he kind of just came up to spend see a game, hang out with his teammate, especially with him already committed to Oklahoma. But that'll be something just to watch. I'm sure. I mean, Penn State's obviously going to recruit him very hard, but where that leads long term is only time will tell. But a couple other guys, Antonio Cotman out of Life Christian Academy. He's a teammate with Joshua Miller. And then Caleb Spencer, he's also out of Life Christian Academy. I have Caleb as a linebacker probably at the next level. I got to get an updated height and weight on him, but that's kind of what Penn State people are talking about. He's listed as a defensive back on most of the big sites. And then Cotman, too, is kind of similar where he can maybe grow into a linebacker. I have him more as a safety right now. Cotman's actually cousins with Ellis Brooks. You probably fans pay attention to Twitter. You would have saw some photos of all the Life Christian guys hanging out with Ellis before and I believe after the game. So, but there was 18 uncommitted scholarship guys for 2023, which is good. I didn't even hit on Jaden Davis, the 2024 number one quarterback in the country. That was his second visit to Penn State, which is always a good sign. He was here originally in July. He's another guy, man, coming from South Carolina. That was a hectic day. I actually felt bad for them. They were supposed to fly out of Harrisburg to go home, and the flight was overbooked. So they flew up and then were taking a rental car home. I was talking to Jaden and his dad. Yeah, it sucked. I was talking to Jaden and his dad on Sunday about it. They weren't happy about that situation, but the actual visit part went well. It was good for them to see a game up here. Anthony Specca, too, is another top 2024 guy from Central Catholic. He's out for the season now. He had a really good year. I wrote a story on him last week with stats and just kind of updating his progress. He's another guy. I think Notre Dame, Penn State, they seem to be the two standing out. So wasn't anything close to the Auburn list. You're not going to have that with a noon kickoff, but pretty good list overall for Penn State, and that should be their I would assume that's their final big one. We'll talk about Rutgers visitors here in a second and what I got so far.
How would you assess Penn State's, after not having it for an entire season, Penn State's game day visit success so far this year? Obviously, I think most people, Ryan, would point to the commitments that have happened on game day as kind of the highlight, but those are, I guess you could say, dime a dozen, and there's obviously more instances of guys coming, visiting, and committing later. So just as you look back as we get ready to talk about the final weekend with visitors at Penn State for a home game in 2021, how would you assess how things have gone so far this season?
Well, yeah, I mean, that Auburn game tells you a lot. I mean, having 50 uncommitted guys, Penn State really put their eggs in that Auburn basket, and it worked out well. It was definitely the best crowd of the year. It was probably the most entertaining game, unless you want to include Illinois. But no, Illinois was definitely not the most entertaining game. I just meant as far as overtime, that was probably the least entertaining game. It worked out well, I think, from that perspective for them. So, when you look at the overall list, Illinois was kind of walk-on heavy. There were a handful of important guys there, but That wasn't one of the best lists. So that actually, I think, kind of worked out well with them losing that game. Although we always overplay the importance of a losing during a visit weekend. You actually just rarely hear kids talk about that. But Indiana was also good with that being a night game. I felt like that actually really helped Penn State. This Michigan list is the opposite then. With that being a noon kick, it really had a damper on it. Penn State originally had about 30 uncommitted scholarship 2023 guys set for this list. And then that got withered down quite a bit. I mean, there were some top guys down in Georgia and at IMG Academy. A couple guys were planning to come. Dakari Nelson's a top safety prospect from Alabama. He was planning to come, couldn't make it. So I think you did about as well as you could, right? I mean, it's especially with so many guys took visits in the summer, and then so many guys just rushed to take visits in the beginning of the season to see as many games as you could. And now we're getting to a point now in November where playoffs are really impacting these lists. And also just guys are getting tired, man. I mean, they've been feels like they've been taking visits nonstop in June, July, September, and into October. A lot of guys are just like, hey, I need a little bit of break. I'll pick up again in junior day. So listen, Penn State always has like the best recruiting list in the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, if you don't include Ohio State, which that's not Mid-Atlantic State, but Rutgers, Maryland, Boston College, like all Virginia Tech, all those schools would love to get many of the visitor lists that Penn State's able to pull in. So they did about as well as they could. It got them a couple commitments in 2023, and a lot of guys seeing a good atmosphere. That'll hold some weight when junior days come around, and they're able to get those different kind of visits, those one-on-one kind of visits come January and into March.
All right, that's Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. Ryan Snyder and Greg Pickel coming down the home stretch of another edition as we sit here in mid-November. All right, so it is Rutgers week. It's probably going to be I would say, limited crowd of recruits who are on hand, but you do have a couple early names to know. Where should we be focused here? And I would assume that this is not going to be a game with a on-field commitment prior to it. Is that correct?
I hope not. I'm going to see Drew Alar Friday night, so I'm hoping to sleep in a little bit Saturday. You can handle that one, buddy. Anyway, I think it's going to be a pretty walk-on heavy list, and we see that at the end of the year pretty regularly.
Sure.
Penn State has really identified a lot of the top walk-on candidates that they want to get, and they want to bring them up here for a game before the end of the year. So we'll get that full list out a little later in the week, but one thing fans are going to notice is it should have quite a few walk-on guys. And they by the way, they got Will Patton as a long snapper this past weekend. I didn't even hit on him, but I don't really know Will all that well. I thought he actually was already committed to Penn State, and then I guess he wasn't. So my mistake. But to get into the scholarship guys, one guy that's very interesting to me is Jameel Lyons out of Roman Catholic. He came up here and just crushed it in the summer for camp and immediately picked up an offer. He's a tank of a player. I wish I had his numbers in front of me right now. And then he ran like a 4.7 40. I mean, I think he's like 6'4", 270-ish. Maybe that might be. I think 240-ish. Anyway, so his whole situation is just academically, and the good thing there is just I'm hearing that he's making real improvement there, and that wasn't something I was encouraged about, I guess, early in the year. By the way, Lyons is like 6'4", like 240, but that's a good sign because Penn State would love to get this young man. I mean, every time I've seen him, he's the kind of player they're kind of missing. I mean, he's not as developed as like one of those top guys, but physically, I mean, he's incredibly impressive. And like I said, when he came to camp, he put up some incredible numbers. So the hope is to get him on campus this weekend. With him being Roman Catholic, I wouldn't be surprised if like Tyseer Denmark came back too. Don't have him confirmed at the moment, but some of his teammates, Austin Ramsey actually was a guy who was just up this past weekend. He holds a Penn State offer as well. So we'll see what happens there. Eric Gardner is a good defensive line end prospect from Archbishop Wood. Here in Penn State's trying to get him on campus. The whole thing with Eric is just is he big enough for Penn State? Because his tape's very good. I mean, I think he's gonna play somewhere at the Power 5 level. It's just, is he quite big enough? I mean, a lot of sites have him at like 6'2", 225. I mean, I feel like he's probably closer to 6 foot, 225. I got to get an accurate number there. One guy to keep an eye on, I'd be surprised if he visits with a noon kick, is TJ Metcalf. It's from Alabama. I forget the school name. I think it's Pinson Valley, I want to say. He's a pretty good prospect. Already has an offer from Penn State. Florida State's another one. I believe Ole Miss is a school to offer him. Tennessee, trying to look at a couple others. Yeah, Tennessee's probably the other top school. But Penn State's been trying to get him on campus for a while. He's definitely one of their top safety prospects in this class. So,
also,
is he going to make it for his
cousin, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, is he? That was the one thing I was a little unsure about, so I wasn't going to run my mouth on that. But
yes,
if he, hey man, another Alabama or another Southern guy making it up for noon, if he makes it, like salute, dude, that's incredible. But I know he was one guy like on the list that Penn State's trying to work on, so we'll see what happens there. And then Quentin Martin, the top 2024 prospect out of Bell Vernon, right now, I mean, I think he's number 10, 11, no, 12 in the on-3 consensus. I mean, we're talking about a 5-star player here, I believe. Yeah. So really curious. I'm hoping they are able to win. I think they play Thomas Jefferson this week. And if they're able to win that, I want to go out to maybe the WPIAL finals the following weekend and get a good eye on him. I wanted to see him play earlier in the year and just wasn't able to make it work. So those are 4 guys to keep an eye on. The list is going to be, like I said, it's going to be run on heavy. I would probably think like 10 or so scholarship uncommitted guys are there. There'll be a handful of commits. I believe Abdul Carter's coming back, which, by the way, if you haven't seen Abdul Carter's new film, check it out, man, because that I thought that was one of the best senior season highlights I've seen so far. And I know Penn State's really thrilled with the progress they've seen from him. So there'll be a handful of commits, probably 10 or so uncommitted scholarship guys. And like I said, be pretty run on heavy. They want to get those guys up here to give them a look at the school and try and get them to join the program.
All right, it's been another edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. We got to a lot. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to find our older episodes or other videos, youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated. Leave us some feedback if you were listening to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever else you get your audio. Ryan, any final thoughts here as we get ready for another week of Penn State football and the final home game of the year?
I mean, just like I mentioned, Drew Allar's about to play the biggest game of his career this weekend. You got to pay to watch the Ohio playoffs, but if you're ever going to pay $10 to watch a high school game, this would be the one to watch. So I am planning to go out there Friday night. I still have to finalize a hotel. I did that drive earlier in the year. I don't think I'm going to do that drive this time. I think I'm going to get a hotel. It was like a 7.5 hour round trip last time. This one's
and then I believe you showed up for the game the next morning, which was kudos to you, but also rather.
I left at halftime though. I left at halftime. I came and took recruiting photos and. That wasn't going to work. Bo Prabula was upset in the playoffs last week. Sucks that Bo's season came to an end. He had a great year, though, man. 2,576 yards, 33 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Missed field goal at the end. He played great in that championship game, too. 20 for 33, 308 yards, and a touchdoand. Dude, Nick Singleton's game last week, how about that, man? 325
Video game
yards.
Numbers.
7 touchdowns on 15. Man, everybody says video game numbers. I don't know how good you guys are at Madden, but I ain't putting up numbers like that in Madden. I always joke about that with my brother. But unless you play on like rookie mode, I guess then you can do it. But Deni Dennis Sutton's got McDonough going to the championship game, man. Since his return, they're 5-1, which is pretty impressive, man. He's had a real big impact on them. So. Abdul Carter was upset. I had LaSalle as the best team in the state, and it sucks they had to play St. Joseph's Prep, who's probably like the second or third best team in 6A. It sucks that one of those schools have to get eliminated every year, but that's how it works when you play top competition in Philly. So, a bunch of guys still alive in the playoffs, and Nick Singleton. Try and get out to see Nick Singleton if you can. If you live in the Harrisburg area, I would hope Governor Mifflin makes it to the state championship. I think they're definitely the best team in 5A. But try and get out to see that young man because he's been incredible. And if you live out in Cleveland, absolutely go to that St. Edward's Medina game. And hopefully I'll see you there.
All right. It is the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. Join us at On3, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. A subscription is just $1 for an entire year of access. For Ryan Snyder, I'm Greg Pickel. We will talk to you next time on the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast.